Services can be very profitable. So thinking about how you package these things is one of the things. So that one is I just have more experience than I would say most doctors and most staff. The second thing is this is what I spend all day thinking about. So, the office is thinking about, oh my gosh, this person has macular degeneration and like, oh, this is terrible. And there's all this emotional stuff that they're thinking about and dealing with the patient. I don't have to worry about any of that, right? Like I'm not thinking about the patient's consequences for what you're seeing during the exam. All I'm thinking about are how do we ensure that we have the right language to sell the right products when it presents itself? So my wife will come home and she'll be really sad once a month because she'll have found somebody that has, found out they had cancer. And one of the consequences of the cancer is chemo. And so now their vision is bad. Or they have some sort of progressive eye disease. That means they're going to go blind in 5 years. That has an emotional impact on you.
Hello and welcome to the Cashflow Podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with my good friend Tom Chapman. We talked about the difference between things like receipts and sales. We talked about the importance of creating habits within our patients. We talked about eyelid hygiene. It was a really fun conversation. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local Macu Health representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health.
There are 6'4" and skinny people who are good at it, but it's not predetermined. Like when we went on these college visits to see these really good runners, all different body shapes, tall, skinny, short, kind of stubby. Like Seth Hirsch is probably 5'6" and he's not like a fire plug, but he's thicker than most of the runners that I interact with. He used to be the best runner in Nebraska history. And it's like, I don't know, weird.
Yeah. Well, it's weird for me to see because I never was a cross country runner in high school. Jamie was, but it's weird for me to see just the differences in abilities of different people, and they don't necessarily look like you would expect them to from running.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what I was wanting to talk about today, Tom, was mainly with, well, I mean, what I was going to talk about was basically about our thoughts about profitability as a provider, where we can often get bogged down in revenue, like thinking about revenue. And I think that does something that I like to consider as like a dopamine hit. And I've kind of done the math in presentations before, but essentially if you were looking at revenue, there's a couple different sides of how we consider things. The first one is when we think about revenue, we think, okay, well, how much money am I putting in the bank right now? And a lot of the reports that we might run in our practices would look at things like, you could look at receipts. That might be a report that we'd look at. The other one would be sales. And so a lot of times there's a dopamine hit or amount of money that comes when we sell something and collect money right away. One of those main things is, an example is managed vision care plans. So if you, just for quick math purposes, if you have a managed vision care plan and a patient purchases glasses and it's a single vision pair of glasses, and let's say it's a $250 frame, you might collect with a retinal screener and a $10 copay, and then a $250 frame with single vision lenses, you might collect on a managed vision care plan for that day about $320. So every one of those patients that come in and buy glasses, that's about a $320 money in the bank today. So that does something weird to eye doctors' minds because they think $320, or maybe it's the opportunity to sell a multifocal or a progressive lens. And that might be on the order of $700 or $800 right in the bank on that day. And when you think about that, it immediately makes you think, well, this is really valuable to me. But then there's this other side of it. So you compare that with what I talk about a lot, which is medical care. And so let's say I saw 20 patients in a day, and the national average of capture rate for glasses is about 43%. And many of the listeners might say, well, my capture rate is higher than that, et cetera. I'm going to put a sort of a caveat in here to say that the managed vision care, so let's assume that it's 43%. That means 9 of the 20 patients are going to buy glasses. And yes, they might have contact lenses and other things, but just to make the math simple, that means 11 of them are going to get no glasses. So if I see 20 patients, 20 comprehensive exams, 9 get glasses, let's just assume for the simplicity's sake, it's a $250 frame, single vision lenses, and then 11 of them are basically going to be we're going to collect $10 for their copay, and we're going to collect a retinal image. And so then we're assuming that every single one of those patients gets a retinal image. Every single one of those patients has a $10 copay. What that means in terms of money in the bank for the day winds up being something close to about $3,600 for the day. Now, if I were to see 20 patients with just medical exams, and let's assume the highest copay that we'll likely see, which is going to be $70. So 20 patients come in, all medical, you don't do any refractive care, not even a refraction. And that patient then pays $70. That means 20 patients, that's $1,400 in the bank. So there's this dramatic difference between what I put in the bank today with routine care and selling glasses and contact lenses and medical care, putting copays. But what happens is, so now all of a sudden, a lot of people think, well, that wasn't worth it, my time. It wasn't worth my time to do medical. And so, but what happens in 2 weeks is now we get these chargebacks from the managed vision care plan versus dumping in of money or from the medical insurance, or presumably if that's deductibles, then you have to go get that from the patient. Again, that's a little bit of a hassle for a lot of practices. But if you actually look at the number, my advocacy in this case is not to say do all medical, don't do any routine. But when you actually look at the numbers, if we assumed a 99213, so an office visit, a mid-level office visit, and one additional special test, we'll assume a visual field because most people have it. that number shifts to about $3,000 in revenue, pure profit revenue, obviously, in the medical care. And it shifts down to about $2,600 in the routine care after you take out your cost of goods, your chargebacks, those sorts of things. And so, again, my point here is to say, if we're that essentially it's about the same, right? You could make the medical care higher because there's a lot of patients who might need more services than the one, or higher level services. And you could make the managed vision care higher if they're getting progressives or better materials. But it's that difference in like understanding revenue, understanding money in the bank, and also understanding incremental revenue that occurs. And there's just this dopamine hit. And you've got a lot of experience helping doctors understand this, because they might add an incremental additional, additional, we'll call it a widget, right? In your case, it might be Peak Eyelid Cleanser. And I might charge, we'll just, for even numbers, we'll say $50 for that Peak Eyelid Cleanser. And so I'm thinking, well, $50, that's not that much. But again, there's an immediate benefit, $50 per patient times 20. That's immediate benefit, money in the bank. But then there's also the revenue that comes in after your cost of goods. And so that's what I want. As a long introduction to sort of open it up to say, how should we be thinking about these types of things? Am I thinking about them wrong? It's taken me a long time to get to that point.
Are you thinking about them wrong? Probably not. So I tend to think, I thought of three different things as you were talking. So I'll say
that's all. I talked for a long time.
So three big things. I also, considered world peace and, other
water.
Things. But the first thing was the difference between cash flow and kind of what you see in accrual accounting, right? So cash flow is how much cash do I have in the bank? So I've consulted with a lot of small businesses over time. The number one financial way, so as you're just starting a business, the number way you think about a business is how much cash do I have in the bank? So getting $3,000 today, cash in the bank, might matter to somebody that's just stringing along, trying to pay bills, etc. In my experience with optometry practices, there actually are a significant number of practices that are just trying to figure out, how do I cash flow my business so that I can pay all my bills month to month? That is a cash flow way of thinking things. That's really, I have cash in the bank. I have cash in the bank to pay bill X. That's a little bit different than sort of the idea of living, sort of shifting into sort of, okay, now I'm thinking about my profit and loss statement. And my profit and loss statement is the way that I'm looking at this business. And that profit and loss statement is typically going to have something at the top that's revenue. And it's going to essentially say there was some cost of goods. And so this is my gross profit. And it's going to go through my expenses. And at the bottom, I'm going to have, some sort of net profit number, however you want to define that. In finance, they would call it EBITDA. I'm not going to go into a bunch of financial statements, but that shift from thinking of cash in the bank to profit and loss is a major shift for the way businesses think about the practical, how do I make decisions in the business?
Can I pause you there?
Sure.
Because I think this is interesting to me, because I do think about cash flow all the time. And even in our business where it's very, it's successful, it's a successful practice. I am concerned about how much money I have in the bank. And what I've trained myself to do is to keep a certain amount of money in there. Mm-hmm. So I feel good about the amount of money that's in there. But the way, and this actually comes down to a lot of even the differences in terms of how we've grown Peak versus how we've grown exclusively eye care.
Yep.
So obviously, for the listeners, Tom and I are partners in a company called Peak. If you don't already know that, and one of the expertises that Tom has is growing businesses in ways that I don't know how to grow businesses. And so my point in bringing that up is just to say that when I think about growing a business, I think about cash flow. I think I'm going to make a widget, I will sell the widget, and then I will make some more money, and then I will reinvest in that widget making business. The shift in over to profit and loss, if I go onto my QuickBooks right now and I run a profit and loss for exclusively eye care,
yep,
or iCode education, I understand it. Like I understand it generally.
Yeah.
But if you really wanted to ask me a bunch of details about projections or what does this mean, I'm sure you could stump me on a number of things. But how is that shift different? So we've got to one of the topics, but how is that shift different from thinking about it as a cash business, thinking about it as a profit and loss?
So I think what ends up the way that you think about things ends up being, am I thinking of this as sort of an urgent, scarce resource, or am I thinking about this as a business that I know is going to make it another month, quarter, year? And in that, am I optimizing the way that I buy products? Am I optimizing the way that I buy frames? Am I optimizing who my customers are?
Because it's easier for me to optimize it if I don't think about I've got to take this money out and feed my family versus I can strategize with where I'm making purchases when I'm making them.
So one of the questions I tend to ask every startup that I work with is, who is your customer? And almost everyone that I talk to will say, well, everyone's my customer, or, all construction, fill in the blank of whatever they're trying to do. And I'm like, but that's not true. Because if that was true, then you wouldn't be marketing to patients in your zip code. You'd be marketing to Toronto. And it's like, well, no, it's not people in Toronto. It's people that live in Omaha, Nebraska. And it's like, okay, well, great. So we've gone from everyone in the world to Omaha, Nebraska, to 68154, to people that are going to do cash pay, buy more than one pair of glasses, et cetera. And it's like, when you think of your business as customers, who are my customers and who makes me the most money? You start to shift the way that you think about the business from, how do I have maximum dollars today, to how do I maximize my dollars over the course of a period of time? And when you think of maximizing dollars, like frequently what ends up happening when I talk to people is like, oh, actually, I don't need to take that managed care plan, and it means I get Fridays off, but I make more money. I bring home more money when I do that. Yeah. Or I don't need to sell these 4 pairs of glasses up there because the only people that buy them are not the customers that I'm trying to attract.
Yeah.
Or, go down the list. Yeah. Or I do need to buy this piece of equipment because the only way for me to get that perfect customer is to offer this service that I can't offer today. And so when you start to kind of shift from, I have to manage my business day to day, to I have to manage my business over some indefinite period of time, it changes the way you think about your customers. It changes the way you think about the strategy of how do you attract them? What are the services that they're requiring or requesting? Those sorts of things. So, when the last kind of piece there would be when you start to get into planning where you're thinking quarters in advance. I want to produce $100,000 of profit in the fourth quarter of 2024. How do I change my business to think, do I need to have more inventory bought now because I'm going to get a discount, knowing that I'm going to sell that all in December because it's a Christmas, run. And
that discount then contributes to the $100,000 that we might be, as opposed to $90,000.
As opposed to $90,000. Right. And the point of that is, I think my experience with optometrists is many optometrists are sitting in that profit and loss thought process. There are not insignificant numbers that are still thinking on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of that is not a matter of thinking about the physical paper that you're reading it off. It's thinking about, what are my inputs? And then how does that push to the bottom line, the profit? So that's one thing I think about. The second thing I think about that you kind of mentioned about profitability is, I think there's a perception that profitability has to be a certain number to be worth it.
Yeah. And wait, a certain number or a certain percentage?
Certain like that there is a number that if you're not doing this, that, oh, I'm looking at my peers and my peers are getting this much money or this percentage, but you might have a totally different business than your peers. You might be seeing a different type of patient because you prefer to see those patients. You might be in a different geography. You might have a cost that they don't have. So, like a really easy one is, think about if I was owning a practice that is in downtown Manhattan and then downtown Manhattan, Kansas. Mm-hmm. Like my cost of just space is radically different. My cost of electricity is radically different. My client type is radically different. And all of that means that when you're looking at the way you think about the business, you can go back and say, well, you should have about X% on rent. Well, you're going to have more in New York than you do in Kansas. Mm-hmm. You should have X% on employees. Well, you're going to have more in New York than you do on in Kansas. And so while you might be inside of the same basic ratio group, the way it affects your business is really different.
Totally.
So like I see a lot of businesses that are like, I was working with a group in San Francisco. This group in San Francisco wanted to be open 9 to 5. And I was like, well, when do your customers like get into work? Because you have nobody that lives nearby. And they're like, oh, well, they get in at 9 o'clock. I'm like, have you thought about offering like a 7:30 to 10 and then being off for 4 hours, or just serve before lunch and after? Because you don't have any local population. Like literally there was nobody who happened to live in their zip code. It was very low. And let me say that differently. There were people that lived in their zip code. It was a lot of fixed income people that lived in their zip code that had lived there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of folks that were their high net worth, the customers they wanted to serve were all basically commuting in. I was like, you probably need to change the way you think about service to those customers as opposed to trying to make them fit into your perception of when optometrists are practicing.
It makes me think of a couple things. I mean, the first one is even just the idea of incremental, so it comes down to, I think that value proposition is how much revenue am I making? So to say all of what you're saying, let me take a step back and say, Dr. Lindsay and I, my associate, have had conversations recently because a lot of her patients, when she gets new patients, so I had quite a few new patients this week. And I don't see that many new patients unless they specifically, I see somebody in their family or they come in from a referral. And so when, so there were a couple instances of that this week, actually numerous instances of that this week, which was surprising to me because I almost never see new patients. So there's like new patient. That's crazy. And every single one of them, had a managed vision care plan. And then you start thinking about, well, they got in to see me because they know somebody who has sent them in, and in this case, it was all family members. But, we've had these conversations because a lot of these patients, when Dr. Lindsay sees new patients, they come in through a managed vision care plan, and we only take 2, but it's just sort of like we made these comments like, oh, it's a full moon, and none of these patients want anything extra. They say they only want what's on their plans, etc. And I don't really think that patients mean that. They just mean today, I just want what's on my plan. But I bring that up because I think it comes to, and it speaks to your point of people are, like, what kind of practice do we want to build? And that's what I've talked to Dr. Lindsay about. It's like, well, what kind of practice do we want? What do you want to build? Because I'm as full as I need to be, and she's still growing. And then also, like, I always think of like the risk of seeing a new patient, because you don't have any idea if this patient's crazy, if they're, if they're going to be
100%
a burden on your staff. And we don't want to see those patients. Like,
right.
I want to see patients who need my help. That doesn't mean that like patients are easy. It just means I don't want crazy patients.
Yeah.
And so the risk of like seeing a new patient is like, they don't want the care that you're providing. They want what they think they want. And they could be crazy. Like, that's actually a pretty big risk. So your point of being selective and saying, hey, we really need to think about our business as far as the type of patients that we want, and be intentional about that's very important. The second thing that you talked to me about is the idea of, we look often at, well, if I do this, like if I offer, you and Aaron were talking about, do you want fries with that? You made that comment. And, a lot of times certainly it's going to be hard for me to invest 15 minutes of my staff's time talking about something that might generate $25 in profit. That might not be worth my time because I'm already paying my staff a lot of money and there's overhead.
Yeah.
But if it takes me 30 seconds or less to ask, do you want fries with that? Now $25 in profit becomes something significant. And that changes the game when you're thinking of, well, I'm in Manhattan, Kansas, and my overhead is, 10, let's say X percent, 10%, or in Manhattan, New York, and my overhead is 30% in terms of those costs. Yep. That $25 essentially is the same cost each time. And so it comes down to, how do we start thinking about those types of things in ways for us to be aware that it's not just about the net dollar amount. I mean, it is important. The net dollar amount is important. But if the net dollar amount comes from a 30-second conversation from the doctor or the patient, there's not many things that are worth $25 for 30 seconds.
So there's a couple things in there that I want to kind of drive towards. The first one is, think about that patient that comes in on a managed care plan of some variety. Some of the reason that they say, I want only what is covered by my insurance, is because they don't actually value their eye health. And I mean that sincerely. So if I said to somebody, tell me about your eyes, how many of them can tell you anything other than I see good or bad?
Right. I have 20/20 vision.
Right.
I've always had 20/20 vision, but you don't anymore. And it's not just about 20/20 vision.
And the point of that is, like, what they're valuing is the thing that we've told them to value for 100 years. So part of why you might want to see a managed care patient is so you can say, hey, you should value other things. So, on the dry eye space, the number of people that I talk to on Zoom phone calls, who are on Zoom phone calls for 10 hours a day, who when I talk to them at 5 o'clock are like, my eyes do hurt right now. I'm like, no kidding. You haven't really blinked all day at the rate you need to blink. So your eyes hurt. When you read, I'm a software person, so I read a lot of technology journals. When you read reports on, fill in the blank, Xbox and all these groups are coming out with EA's college football 25 or whatever it is. There's going to be a bunch of people staring at that screen for 20 hours this weekend where they're not blinking. And when they get done, they're going to be like, I have a headache and my eyes hurt. And they're going to have done it for 5 days straight. Well, if they do it 5 days and it's over, then it's fine. Well, now they're sitting in your chair a month from now and they're talking about all their, quote, dangerous behavior, bad behavior, etc. It's our job to sort of be like, hey, you should know over the course of time, like, that's like drinking a Coke and not brushing your teeth. That there is an impact to your long-term health that you won't appreciate until it's gone.
Yeah. And it's a slow
decline. And that's the sort of reason that you might say, hey, it's really valuable for me to take 30 seconds, knowing they're not going to say yes today, but I'm priming them to have heard about dry eye. I'm priming them to have heard about these things that are long, slow problems that are going to persist and be present in a lot of our customers over the course of time. Now, the second piece of that is there's an opportunity where your time is more valuable than your staff's time. And my impression from most clinics is the lowest paid staff person is sitting behind the desk, handling the phones or doing appointments. So that person getting one sale per hour, that is a $25 sale, is more valuable net than you getting that exact same sale.
Correct.
So when are there times that you can get that person to have more at-bats during the day that aren't necessarily the things that the doctor or that the optician should be doing, where a little bit of success by that person yields significant success for your bottom line that is just out of the blue.
Do you know? It's so funny. I flew down. You didn't meet him, Jeff Crone, my buddy, who's a pilot with me, and I'm going to mention Jeff because he's a great guy. And but he'll go with me when we fly different places. If I'm going by myself, I'll just say, hey Jeff, you want to come along? He's an engineer and he can work from anywhere. And if he's available, he'll come. And it's just I look at it like I get to hang out with somebody. I don't have to have dinner alone. And also, I love him. He's a great guy. And also I think I'm safer. I'm a safer pilot. But he said to me, so we flew down to Springfield, Missouri last week. And, we were just chatting over a meal and he goes, Chris, you guys need to upsell more. I was like, and my practice, Mm-hmm. I would say we're probably, well, you could tell me, but I would guess we're probably, in the upper echelons of the practices who offer additional things that are not just glasses and contact lenses. And could we do a better job? Absolutely. Clearly we could, because Jeff is not a hard sell guy. Like if I were trying to hard sell Jeff, he would sniff it out immediately and he'd be like, Chris, this is ridiculous, But he made the comment, he goes, well, look, I needed more eyelid scrub and your team didn't ask me if I needed more. So I left and then I remembered it and I had to come back another day.
Yep.
So, I know we're going to a similar conversation that you had with Aaron, but it like blew my mind because I was like, Jeff, are you kidding me? I talk to Tom about this all the time. And our staff, I've heard them. They do a wonderful job of asking, but we miss the opportunity. And that opportunity, if we miss once a day, 5 days a week, it's $25, 5 days a week. That's what, 200, what I can't do math.
$125
times 50.
$6,250.
Yeah. So $6,200. out of my pocket. Out of my pocket. And that's the kind of stuff that is mind-blowing.
So I've watched your practice. You're good at what you do. Your practice is
Thanks.
good. I'm going to give an example from my wife's practice, who's also good at this.
Who's better? I think she's better. This stuff, for sure, she's better.
I literally watched one of Peak's first customers check out and get told that they could buy the same product at Walmart. I watched it happen. And I mean, there's two people in the office. It's me, Denise, and the person doing the checkout. So, I mean, like, there was no rush, confusion, etc. And Denise literally looked over at me and was like, no, I think I'll buy it here. My point of that is, like, this is both a training thing, but there's also a perspective that, as I've talked to staff, sometimes staff's like, oh, we're so expensive. And the reality is, I can speak from Peak's prices. You are not more expensive than what they're going to buy at Walmart. Your staff doesn't know that there's a different drop by the same brand name that is less expensive, but is not what you're recommending, because you need a contact lens drop, because you need a dry eye drop, because you need fill in the blank, a tea tree oil scrub rather than a soap. And the reason is, you have an expertise that, while your staff is trained, they don't think about it all the time, because in their life, they've only bought the products that they use. They're not sitting behind looking at mites every day and going, oh, false eyelashes, so I have to use hypochlorous, not tea tree oil, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Instead, they're just responding to, like, oh, 90% of the time, this is the correct answer.
Yeah. Well, I think also is, even just in general, a lot of practices aren't less expensive than a big box retailer. I had a patient that came in, and he was in for a RX check, and his comment to me was, I spent a lot of money on these glasses. And he was like, they're advertised as, like, people think they're getting a really good value.
Yeah.
And I just need to get them right, is what he said. And I look back, I thought, oh, well, he got glasses from us, and he didn't. And then I look at the box, and it's like, oh, wow, this is a big box retailer that if I said the name right now, you'd be like, oh, they're selling garbage. But in his mind, he still went there, and he still spent a lot of money on the glasses. So, and I bet that even if we're talking like for like, if we use the same type of products they use, my suspicion is that we would be less expensive than they would be.
I think there's a couple different things in there. I think one of the problems is, as I said, people value their vision. They don't value their eyes. And so inside of that, there is a perspective about what I'm buying. I'm buying 20/20 vision. I'm buying a pair of glasses that looks good. I'm not necessarily buying the right lens. I'm not necessarily buying the right coating. I'm not necessarily buying all these other, because I don't understand it as a customer. And Tom, who is in the space, sort of, really actually doesn't understand a lot of stuff. So, like, if you told me the chemical formulation that led to transitions, I'd be like, I believe you.
I couldn't tell you that.
You know what I mean? But I have no context.
I haven't done the research.
I believe you. I have nothing. So one of the challenges is, in your limited time as the doctor, you are uniquely positioned to be able to provide education, but also your recommendation for whatever product you recommend matters way more than anyone else in your office. So the way you think about that recommendation should be, I am curating the best possible thing for you. And I know this because of A, B, C, and that's it. Because they've already bought into your expertise. That's why they're sitting in your chair. The challenge that you run into is, if you try to compete on price and you say, hey, this is less expensive than, you've already lost, because you've turned it into a commodity rather than an expert purchase, right? Or this product is the same as something you might have seen on TV, but we like it better because. Now you've said, oh, here's a replacement product. What you're trying to do is, you're trying to say, like, look, I'm an expert, and every single thing I'm getting you is the perfect thing for your eyes. So like, one of the struggles that we run into at Peak, like we were talking about this before we went on mic, was sometimes somebody wants an obscure product. And those obscure products,
Nick, you know who you are.
I don't necessarily have like, we'll go do the research, we'll find it, we'll buy it, we'll tell you, hey, here's the price that we got it at. The challenge is, a lot of times those obscure products are obscure for a reason, right? They're imported, they're small batched, there's an issue associated with how they're delivered. And none of those things are bad things that affect your recommendation. they're the correct product in that situation. It's that it might be hard to, quote, scale that product. Whereas some other products are easier to scale that maybe isn't a perfect decision. You are taking all of that information and making the recommendation to your patient. You're not necessarily saying, hey, this is the product I like best, but I can't get it for you, so I've gotten you the second best. Instead, you've said, I have curated, i.e., I've done all the work for you. That work included picking the second best product because you could get it for them. And that's one of the challenges that I see is a lot of times doctors are almost reluctant and staffs are almost reluctant to say, like, look, the difference between us and X is this is what we do all day, every day. And what we're thinking about are your eyes. That's it. We're not thinking about how to sell bikes. We're not thinking about how to sell furniture. All we do is that. And so we want your eyes to be the healthiest they can be. We want you to have 20/20 vision. And we want you to be seeing as well at 70 as you do at 7.
Why do you think you have an easier time saying that? Well, let me ask it. I'll ask it a question. Do you have an easier time saying that than many of the doctors that you observe on a regular basis?
100%.
Why?
I think probably 2 issues. One, I have more experience. So I have sold 55 different things in my life. I've sold video yellow pages to software to, all sorts of stuff. So there's some common fallback things like upselling and cross-selling that are just skills, right? Mm-hmm. So an upsell is, can I make it big, right? So can I biggie size it? Can I supersize it, et cetera? So it's taking a 6-month supply of vitamins and turning it into a year, or a 1-month supply of, cleanser and turning it into a 6-month supply. That's an upsell. A cross-sell is taking something and selling something that is an adjacent product. So it's like selling, instead of just selling a warm compress and a cleanser, you also put in an omega-3 supplement. Right. That cross-sell allows you to put more profitable products attached. So do you want fries with that is an opportunity to put a very profitable attachment to, a burger, which is not a particularly profitable thing. Anytime you had a drink, it's profitable. So like, what are the things and practices that are profitable? Vitamins, there are definitely glasses, services can be very profitable. So thinking about how you package these things is one of the things. So that one is I just have more experience than I would say most doctors and most staff. The second thing is this is what I spend all day thinking about. So, the office is thinking about, oh my gosh, this person has macular degeneration and like, oh, this is terrible. And there's all this emotional stuff that they're thinking about and dealing with the patient. I don't have to worry about any of that, right? Like I'm not thinking about the patient's consequences for what you're seeing during the exam. All I'm thinking about are how do we ensure that we have the right language to sell the right products when it presents itself? So my wife will come home and she'll be really sad once a month because she'll have found somebody that has, found out they had cancer. Mm-hmm. And one of the consequences of the cancer is chemo. And so now their vision is bad. Mm-hmm. Or they have some sort of progressive eye disease that means they're going to go blind in 5 years. That has an emotional impact on you. My job doesn't involve, right. I never ask a doctor, hey, can we put a kit together that, has, for dry eye, where they're like, well, I would, but I can't sell dry eye anymore because, I can't see, right. I mean, like there is no emotional component. So I spend all my life thinking about how do we maximize at least at some level for you, the dollars that you're bringing into your practice in a way that you want to practice that way, right? So we talk a lot about how we do concierge care and how on the back end there's compliance. So we'll call patients. When I talk to patients, we have a lot of emotional stuff going on with patients that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And like that's a very different interaction than when I'm talking to doctors. Doctors are basically doing math and saying this is a good deal or not a good deal. Patients are typically not doing math. What they want to be is heard. So compliance, at least at some level, is about education and listening to the patient say, well, the reason I'm not using my warm compress is because I got makeup on it and it smells bad in the microwave. It's really easy to send them a new warm compress, and that means they're compliant. But that person isn't going to drive to the office and stand up in front of staff. They're just going to stop doing it and say, I'm embarrassed because I forgot to wash my face first.
CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. We've been partnering with EssilorLuxottica 360 for a while now, and it helps us in 3 areas. First, they use social media campaigns to highlight products that we believe in and prescribe to our patients, and they deliver those patients back to our practice. Second, EssilorLuxottica 360 enhances our patient experience through staff training tools that help us simplify and streamline the way we communicate about our products and services. Lastly, but for my practice most importantly, it helps us make good business decisions related to our optical offerings. We will systematically and objectively analyze what our patients are purchasing and what they like, and removing products that our patients are not really using or not really drawn to. This, along with additional rebates and immediate savings, helps us continue to deliver high-quality products and services to our patients and keeps our practice resilient. Check out EssilorLuxottica 360 for yourself by visiting EssilorLuxottica360.com.
And it's like,
yeah, well, nobody comes to this is the point that you and I talked about. Nobody comes to the dentist without brushing their teeth that morning. Like, I don't walk into the dentist after I've had Cheetos. And just like, I should do that. I wonder what they would do.
I mean, so
just like eat them right before I go in.
I think you're talking right before, right? So like the hour before you go to the dentist, you're brushing your teeth,
totally brushing.
You're flossing the 2 days before, all these sorts of things. What does somebody do? Like, are people training their eyes so they have better vision the day before they come into the optometrist?
They'll say, "Oh, I was on the computer all day, so that may impact." It's like, no, well, I can still figure out. You're not going to be able to fool me because you're on the computer all day. But certainly, like, their tear film could be a lot worse for sure if you're not looking for it.
And so, like, a lot of what we end up talking to offices about is, just like the number of times I go into an office and the first thing I ask is, how many of you brushed your teeth today? Everybody raises their hand. And then I say, how many of you washed your eyelids today? And it's like maybe half.
Do you think there's something about the belief so I've been kind of hammering the idea of identity and belief for a long time. Do you think it's just a belief that doctors just don't think it's all that important, or they think it's that important, but it's just something that's going to manifest itself at some point in some distant future, that it's not right here, right now, that I don't have to deal with it? What do you think that is?
So yesterday I had coffee with a friend of mine, my friend 70, Steve Hutchinson.
And by the way, thanks for sending that patient over. Did you talk to him yet?
I did.
He was kind of surprised that he had anterior blepharitis. What did he say about that?
He just sent a note that said, I am now a user of Peak. He said, I'm surprised, but I'm in your category.
He was surprised.
He was.
Do you know what he said? He goes, I thought it was just for women to remove makeup. And I said, no, it's, and I explained it to him, anterior blepharitis, and he had a small amount, but he's got telangiectatic vessels, all these sorts of things. And so anyway, thanks for sending him over.
I read this book last summer. Steve had recommended this book. It's called Outlive. In the book, it talks about how to exercise with more purpose. It doesn't say you should do that. It doesn't say like you need to do, rowing or cross country. It just says you should have a VO2 max workout once a week. So I have started, and I do it every week on Tuesday mornings. Like, my family laughs because on Tuesday they'll be like, how are you feeling? I'm like, I'm tired. And they'll be like, oh yeah, VO2 max day. And he said, I've created a monster.
Who said that? Steve?
Who recommended the book. Cause he said something to me like, how you doing? Cause we had coffee yesterday. It was Tuesday. And I said, well, I did my VO2 max workout today. And he's like, I've created a monster. I don't think it's monstrous to wash your eyelids every day. But I think there's a perception, because it's a change in behavior from the norm, that if you get somebody to wash their eyelids, you've now created you've done something unusual. And it's like, I don't think it's unusual if somebody brushes their teeth every day. I don't think it's unusual if somebody does exercise every day. So like, these health things are things that I would say are not unusual. And I think you said it's common but not normal. In reference to dry eye. It's common but not normal. This is not the state that it should be in. I think that that's a hard thing for everyone associated with optometric clinics to think about dry eye. It's common. All of us have
see it so often.
We see it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's not normal. in like the slow shift from 3 million people with dry eye in 2000 to 40 million people today. And I read an article, Eyes on Eye Care said 64% of patients walking into clinics today have dry eye.
Well, I believe it.
And the
But
point of that is
64% of people walking into clinics are not walking out with a diagnosis of dry eye.
correct.
And that's a huge challenge that as a profession, I think both as a education, so within our education, but also within practice management, because it's not just about knowing that dry eye exists. It's also about understanding that the management of ocular surface disease and dry eye is best for the patient, but it's also best for the practice.
Correct.
And it's just really hard. And some of that even comes back to the beginning of our conversation is, well, if we don't understand what the difference between, receipts and sales and money in the bank in 2 weeks versus money in the bank right now, if we haven't actually done that math, it's really hard to wrap our minds around. Yeah. And I'm not saying the hard part for me when I talk about this is you and I have had a lot of conversations related to money, but the reason maybe I'm overemphasizing this, but I don't think money is at the very front of optometrists' brains per se.
No, I don't think so.
I think it's buried back deep. But what we do, because we want to make patients happy, and part of it is, well, I don't want to charge anybody money or more money than they think I should charge them, because I want them to be happy. I think it ultimately comes down to, I want my patients to be happy. I want them to be happy now. I want them to think I'm a nice person. But any detraction from that, whether it's if I feel salesy, sure, I'm sure that I've probably overcompensated for Jeff because I don't want him as a friend to feel like I'm salesy.
Yep.
And so I think it just comes back to this psychological thing that optometrists are, that we're part of our communities. We are embedded in our communities in different ways than surgeons are in most communities.
Your kids go to the same schools. Your kids play on the same sports teams. Your kids.
Bingo.
And so you see these people and you want to be able to talk about regular life stuff while at a sports game.
Yeah.
You don't want everybody to see you as the doctor who can only talk about eyes and who's trying to sell them something, or is so rich that they're not real humans, or so blank, 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 fill in the blank. And, one of the things that I think is tricky about any type of progressive illness is if somebody had an acute illness, you would respond to them.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
I have something in my eye. I remove it from your eye. And I would respond if I had something in my eye.
That's right. If you came in to see me with a speed of 26, well, let's say this. If you had a speed of 11 today and you had a speed of 5 yesterday, you would be knocking on the door today.
Correct.
But you don't go from having a speed of 5 yesterday to a speed of 11 today. You go from speed of 5, then in 6 months you have a speed of 6, and then 7 months you have a speed of 8. So it's like it becomes a custom. And I would not turn away from your speed of 11 if you're banging on my door trying to get in. But when you're in my practice and it's happened slowly and I see all the signs and you're not begging me to do something about it, becomes easier. So then it's easier to think of it as like, well, it's an acute problem as opposed to a chronic problem, or it's a chronic problem that's you're not symptomatic, so I don't have to do anything else about it.
So how many people do you think use the speed test or OSDI? How many, let's say there's 100 patients.
Are we talking about general
optometrist? How many are using a triage questionnaire that's targeted at dry eye?
1%.
1%.
I think it's 1%.
And so inside of that 1%, you wouldn't even know the difference unless somebody walked in and they had gone from a 5 to a 40.
Nope.
You know what I mean? Like 5 to a 26.
20, yeah.
Because it's 28.
Yeah.
But like you would not know.
Correct.
Because you don't have any baseline.
Correct.
And like a lot of what we're struggling with right now is there's this thing that's presented and it's acute. We've gone up 10x in 20 years. Like that's an acute change. Nobody's talking about it like it's acute because we don't have the baseline. All we have is this general information over in clinical studies that says there's about 3 million. Now it's about 40 million. 64% walking in the door. Like it's a big number. And we know that the cause is tied to screen time, sort of, and medication, sort of, and age, sort of. And, where there isn't if you're on the screen more than 5 hours, you're instantly going to have your eyes fall out of your head. You know what I mean? Like there isn't some sort of acute behavior that you can go like, oh yes, if you do this, then we must take action. Instead, it's this gradual process that has a slow hit that we don't have baselines for, that we know is happening.
Yeah.
But as a staff, as an individual walking around, if I wasn't sitting here and looking specifically for people to be rubbing their eyes all day, specifically hearing people, the one we were joking about is the mixed reality headset, where it's like, read the studies, read everyone that commented on the Vision Pro. And literally in about the 80% through the article, it will say, at the end, I had a headache and my eyes hurt. I mean, every time, 100% of the time. Why? Because you don't blink.
Right.
And within that, it doesn't really matter exactly what the physiology is. These people in these articles aren't like, so I need to do this every time I wear the headset. They're like, no, this is going to be a ubiquitous technology in 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so what we're saying is we're going to create a huge health problem with the eyes on something that we can see from the first user, from the first use, but you won't actually comment on it until the point where you can't see, because you've been thinking about it from a vision perspective, which means you're going to basically sit there and like rub on your cornea. You're going to cause problems before you respond to it, even though you've been waking up every day saying my eyes hurt. and my point of that is to say, like, one of the comments we get back about Peak, and this is not a Peak sales thing. It's just like we get comments about our products.
Yep. I mean, we know Peak because that's what we do, but like, it's just a general conversation about lid hygiene.
I didn't know what clean lids felt like.
Correct.
And it's just like, that is the problem, right? So when you brush your teeth, every day, and then a day goes by and you miss for some reason, you can tell your teeth are dirty.
Mm-hmm.
We're all walking around with dirty lids. So any change is like, whoa. But like, if everyone cleaned their lids every day, you would recognize the day you didn't.
Yeah.
And so we need to reverse the way we talk about this from being like, you're a monster because you're actually compliant, to you're a monster because you're not.
Right.
That's gross.
Right.
Eyelids are gross.
All right. So, to kind of come for full circle, in your view, and in all the practice, and you worked with hundreds, maybe thousands of practices over,
at this point. Probably not thousands, like 2,000, but like 1,000 maybe.
Like, how do we change our behavior, our identity, where we can't look at? So when I look at this, I think where it becomes really important is, what do I need to see clinically where I cannot turn away from it? How do we discuss how, as providers within this realm? Because if I see, let's say, mild anterior cortical cataracts that are not visually disturbing for a patient, I might make a mention of the patient, but I'm not going to like sit and have a long conversation with them. And I know that at some point when that cataract gets worse, we're gonna be able to take it out, and it's pretty much done. Like, we don't have to worry about like other long-term chronic issues. Is it a chronic issue? Sure. But is it a fixable? Like, there is a solution to that, and you can do this one thing and it's done. Whereas if we let this fester, if we let ocular, let's say, telangiectatic vessels on the eyelids, mild collarettes and Demodex along the eyelid lashes, like, to me, it seems like there's something that I have to be able to, I cannot turn away from. Where if I know, for me, it was once I had the belief that if I don't do something now, then 5 years, 10 years downstream, and I've practiced long enough now to see, 16 years, that 5 and 10 years, then I'm going to have to be either apologizing because I didn't identify it early enough to the patient, or I'm going to be dealing with a patient who's a lot more challenging, where I could look back and say, oh, I could have done something here. I just don't want that feeling of like, oh, I could have done something here. Really, it comes down to, when we think about glaucoma, for example, we think just like Cheryl was talking about, is I will tolerate no vision loss from glaucoma, really. And I will tolerate no amount of not identifying glaucoma. And before I just say, like, I can't turn away from this issue. So in your mind, how do we change the way that we think about this so that our identity and our beliefs come like, I can't just walk away from a dirty eyelid and not say something to the patient? In your experience, what has to happen?
So there's two different things that it makes me think about. So the first thing it makes me think about is, we did a name, image, and likeness deal with a college volleyball player. And we showed her the images of her false eyelashes and the Demodex on her false eyelashes. And she would not let us use that on social media
Because it was so gross.
because it's so gross. Think about how often you see somebody that if you said, hey, we're going to put this out there as a case study in how gross eyelids are, how quickly they would change their behavior.
Yeah.
And like you see it every day, right? You see degradation of the meibomian glands. You see just creepy crawlies all over the lashes. I mean, every person that walks in with false eyelashes should be cleaning their eyelashes more. But they're told, don't get these wet.
Right.
And it costs $250. So I'm not going to get them wet. And it's like the care for dry eye over the course of their life, because of those 3 years of not cleaning their lids and just letting stuff breed, it's going to be way more than $250 for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks.
Oh, they got to get them filled in, and they got to get them. So just even the maintenance of them becomes expensive.
And the point,
and patient, and you look at their eyes, and they just look painful.
And the point of that is like, so what we found is if I say to you, your eyes are unhealthy, but I don't feel it, it doesn't matter. If I say your eyes look terrible, like I'm starting to see a beauty impact on your eyes, and we're going to put it on social because it's so gross, that will cause instant behavioral change. So like the first thing I think about is if I were to explain this in a way that we were going to put it out as a case study, how quickly would it change my patient's behavior? And the answer is pretty fast in a lot of cases. The second thing I think about is what is the thing that it's going to prevent the person from doing? So if my eyes really hurt, I maybe don't go to the pool, maybe don't go skiing, and as you progress through dry eye, the number of people that I've talked to who then say like, I can go back outside, not outside regularly, outside period. And so it's like, there are people who don't run their air conditioning because it dries out their eyes. There are people, so like think of the behavioral effect of having dry eye and saying, look, this is what we're trying to prevent. We're not trying to prevent you from having discomfort. We're trying to prevent you from not being able to go outside. We're trying to prevent you from being able, from not being able to go to the pool. We're trying to prevent you from having creepy crawlies all over your eyes that are gross for people to see. It's like, those are the things. And like personally, so I have fake teeth. I have fake teeth because I got them stuck in somebody's head, which is probably a whole different podcast.
No, I didn't know that.
One of my teeth is
You've got falsies?
One of my teeth is capped and it's discolored. It makes me unlikely to smile with showing my teeth. My wife comments and everyone comments that sees me smile.
They say, why don't you care about oral hygiene, Tom?
They typically will say, why don't you smile in pictures? Because you smile, you have a great smile, whatever. And I don't smile because it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel bad when I look at that picture because I say, oh, my smile's not very good looking because I have a discoloration on one of my teeth because it's not a real tooth. Think of the impact of starting to shift the behavior from just health to the thing that the person can relate to. I can relate to not going outside. I can relate to, oh my gosh, this is gross. It's gross enough they're using this as an example. Like, I don't want to say we want to create shame or discomfort, but like they're not going to respond to like, hey, you know what's good for you? It's good for you to get up and exercise every day for an hour. It's good for you to eat these foods, but not these foods. That's hard every day. Whereas if you say like, look, this is getting pretty gross. Let me show you a picture. Like this is a case study in blepharitis. This is a case study in meibomian gland dysfunction. This is a case study. Like being able to phrase it in a way that they can't look away rather than what you can't look away from. Because as the practitioner, I don't know that I'm qualified to say, well, if they have, degradation of 20% of their glands, then right. I don't know that there is a guaranteed step that says everyone should be at this place. I would say as an expert, what you're trying to do is say like, look, the impact on this is not something you will see immediately, but you're starting to see, and here's examples. This is only getting worse.
As you're talking about it, what's interesting to me is almost like sometimes where patients, it doesn't hit as well, because we use anterior segment imaging all the time. But where it doesn't hit as well is when I show them under a microscope. It usually does hit really hard when I show them under a microscope. But to your point, a lot of times I walk in on a patient. I mean, the vast majority of times when I walk in on a patient that has, we'll say moderate or worse ocular surface disease. I know it just by looking at them.
Right.
I can see their glossy eyes. I can see their red conjunctiva. I can see their red lid margin. And even some of the mild patients where they're not symptomatic, I can start seeing that when I just walk into the room. It almost makes me wonder if I shouldn't just, in those cases, just like look at them and just be like, your eyes, are they uncomfortable? Do you have fluctuating vision? Like your eyes look like they're not very comfortable.
And so like as a not doctor, i.e. somebody that spends time and knows enough to know most of the words you just said, I would say there are times that when I look at somebody who has dry eye, I assume they've been smoking weed all day.
Yeah.
I assume they're on cocaine.
And they'll even say that. They'll say, I'll walk into a room, I'll go into a meeting, and people will ask me, like, were you smoking weed all day?
And the point of that is like, those types of things are what your patient is thinking. I'm trying to get rid of this appearance. So if you're dealing with a 55-year-old woman or a 50-year-old woman, they're thinking about the fact that they're getting old. And like the eyes are the windows to the soul. There are a lot of ways you can talk about it, but anything you can do to make them feel like they're looking less old is a benefit that they'll pay for, in a way that if you walk in and say, well, we're trying to get the quality of your tears up. No, what we're trying to do is make your eyes look better, because right now they look like they hurt.
So we started out this conversation talking about profit and loss and net. I think we only got to one of the things that you were thinking about at the beginning, but how do we tie this all back in and kind of wrap it up with a bow with thinking about taking care of the patients, understanding that taking care of the patients through the words that we use and how we communicate to the patients, how does that impact our practice?
So I think there's relatively good evidence that, dues to go through the list, that the correct dry eye protocol is eyelid hygiene, warm compress, omega-3 supplements, maybe a short-term drop.
At the beginning.
Yeah. As soon as you see it, let's get them started. Okay. So let's assume that that's most of what people think. There might be some iterations. There might be some people that say no drops, or they might say, oh no, we only got to get them started on a warm compress. We don't need to improve eyelid hygiene. I'm not trying to say this is what it is, but I think there's good evidence. Now let's talk about profits per exam. And I want to switch it to saying profits on a person that comes to see you that has one comprehensive exam a year.
Okay.
That person, if they're in a dry eye protocol, is going to come see you more than one time. So over the course of 12 months, they might come see you for 4 additional treatments. They might come to see a regular ocular surface exam. Those end up being more touches on the same person that create more profit potentially on that individual patient while you are actually doing the correct thing for their care. So when we think about peak, we don't necessarily think, hey, we're going to try to figure out how we, quote, milk a patient. What we're thinking about is compliance is the most important thing that we can do beyond that treatment, IPL, beyond, whatever. It's getting them to do the right thing every day as part of a habit. It's getting them to brush their teeth every day. It's getting them to exercise every day. So how do we make that happen? Well, if you work with Peak and if you do something that creates that compliance, what's going to end up happening is you're going to sell them something that has a really regular profit on top of that. So our boxes generally will have about a 30% gross profit to the practice, more or less. Right now, according to the review of optometric business, the profit per patient on a comprehensive exam is 5%. 5%.
Yeah. And so to break that down for the listeners, what Tom is describing is after you pay the doctor, so you'd almost be thinking about the EBITDA per patient. How much does the owner actually put in their pocket? 5%.
5%.
Yeah.
So when I think about selling a tea tree oil cleanser, a 50 milliliter for $25, I regularly hear, well, I don't make much money. Guess what? You're already not making much money. From my perspective, 5% is incredibly low. I would expect a good service business to be in the 30 to 40%. That's what I would expect.
Yeah, like a plumber or electrician. So actually to take I should ask my cousin who's a plumber, what is his net? What is his net percentage? But he, just to give you some perspective, he dropped his commercial division because, his gross was probably 3 to 4 times what his gross was for his residential division. But his net profit was 2%.
Yeah, they're squeezing you because you have an experienced customer who's going in and they're really putting pressure on those margins.
Yep.
Because they know exactly how much
and they know costs. It's a really big job. So if I can sell you, if you collect this big job, $1 million, let's say, but you're only getting 2%, you're thinking, you just, again, the dopamine hit is different.
And so I would be thinking about what are the profitable services and products that we sell in the office, and when are they most profitable, right? So you can do better than a peak kit by selling an annual subscription of vitamins. I would recommend every office should have some mechanism to do that, whether that's, MacuHealth, PRN, Nordic Naturals. This isn't which brand. This is saying, if you are doing a good job at checkout and just saying to every single person, can we get you started on an annual subscription of blank vitamin?
Right.
You aren't going to get a ton of yeses, but you're going to get a high profit yes. So you get one a day, and it's like making $160 of profit per day.
Yep.
And it's just like, there are people that will just say yes because they don't know how to say no.
Right.
Like literally, you'll just be, in the economic term, stealing rent. But think about all your patients. How many of them would actually benefit from being on a supplement? And go through and say, like, even though it's only 80% of my patients would benefit, if we don't ask every single person, it doesn't become a habit in our office to ask that question.
Yep.
And so the point of that is, like, that is a highly profitable process that you can add. And like, there are processes of that type. And peak is that type of process.
Yeah. And your words were essentially, when they're removed from the uncertainty of if you're doing something right, because yours were, it took 5 seconds to ask that question. And if somebody says no, okay, fine, just move on.
Yeah. You're not hard selling them.
Yeah.
Like, because by the way, how many people that walk into your office are taking some sort of supplement? My guess is it's probably about 50-50, maybe 40-60 are taking a supplement. And you saying, hey, we want to get you started on omega-3 because you're starting to show dry, is one time they've heard that. But they've maybe heard it 6 different times from other doctors. You're offering them, at the point that they've heard it, this thing that benefits them beyond just for their eye health.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I hear about fish oil. Anytime I walk into a doctor's office, I'm hearing fish oil for something that I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
You happen to have it available to be sold.
Right.
You're making it easy, etc. So like, I tend to think about, what are the other things you want to sell? So offices are set up. If you walk into an office as an independent agent, i.e. I am not a doctor, I am not trying to sell you anything. You're trying to sell glasses. You know how I know? Because when I walk in, that's what every single thing that I can buy looks like. It's a pair of glasses. So are you putting your best, like the pair you would like to sell? So if you went through and ranked the 100 frames you have on your board, you said the number one frame we want to sell is this one. Is that the most prominently displayed? Is that the one that gets presented the most?
Yeah, probably
is that,
not.
And like, the point of that is, it is a thought process that says, we are thinking beyond how do we get somebody to say yes today, to how do we make sure that over time we're maximizing the profits that are flowing through our business. And in the case of, dry eye care, you're also maximizing patient happiness and health. So like with dry eye, doing the right thing is also a very profitable thing. Doing the wrong thing, you miss out on profits, but that's not why to do it. Do it because compliance is actually the way people are going to have less discomfort with their eyes from dry eye over time.
Yeah.
And like, that is the hard message, because I think a lot of offices are like, oh, we've never done this before, so it feels salesy.
Yeah.
And it's like, the challenge is, are you going to not tell the person what to do from a dry eye?